Exactly.
with people and so on and all of that.
Ah!
Hi.
You have a space alien in your room.
Yes,
Having great fun.
Bug-eyed monster.
exactly. How are you, Tom?
Doing okay.
I did a kind of a keyword extraction glossary definition thing of our last sessions, and it's full of Tom said this and Tom said that.
Oh, God.
That's a good thing. That's a
I need to
very,
learn to shut up.
no, it's quite the opposite, and it's part of our topic of discussion today. What's the difference between a glossary term, and Tom said something interesting, an annotation, and a document.
So it literally just a minute ago, a friend of mine sent me a link that I just put in the chat. This company is making smart documents, or they're trying to make smart documents, AI-infused documents.
What's the substrate? Is it based on, well, what's it called? Ken, what are the smart documents again? Jupyter Notebook or something?
No, they want to start from scratch. They want to replace docs and PDFs.
I think smart documents are documents that don't use AI.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Anyway, I thought it was a really interesting article.
Please send. Please put it. Or
Yeah.
you already did that.
I dropped it in the chat. If you want me to, I'll email it. But
By giving them their own brain, great. Yeah, we will go through that. Hello, Astral. Hello,
maybe
Ken.
not for today, but maybe for next week or whatever. But it literally just dropped in my lap 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, I mean, the topic for today is basically, as you've all seen, what Jonathan is in now, looking at the space. I just filmed him, just to remind it, and just for the record, filmed it a little bit. When we do start doing things like this, then what it was one thing I did was experiment with extracting stuff from our sessions to have kind of like a meeting record. And one thing that is quite clear for that case study is that you want to have all the people every time, all the meetings, right? Oh, I'll wait for Peter to come in. Hello, brunching Peter.
Good morning, brunching in freezing New York, wrapped up in multiple layers, trying to stay warm.
Yeah, that sounds like the way it is. Hi, Brundle.
Good morning from sweating Texas, where it's hit 80 degrees yesterday.
Good morning from California, where it's just fine.
The only thing you have to worry about is earthquakes.
I was in Kansas City yesterday and it was perfect, and I'm in New York today and it's 0, and on Thursday I'm going to be in Phoenix and it'll be in the 80s.
It's easy.
Phoenix, that's okay. This is unusually hot for Texas this time of year.
It's easy to forget that America is a continent.
Well,
really
unfortunately it isn't, but that's okay.
America's not a continent.
Not the
That's
United
true.
States, but America is.
America is well, North America is a continent.
Yes. Oh, Mark is here. Mark has been overworked recently, so I'm very glad he's here today.
Yes, good to
Hey,
see
Mark.
you. Thank you for your email. Mark brought up the cartographies of time, which I'm pressing on with, despite it being a paper book.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's one of a kind. It's really sad it's out of print because it should be in print because there is another one like it.
Yeah, well, it's university. Well, one of the authors is University of Oregon, which is not far from where Dini is. I'm curious about what the publishers think of a digital edition, particularly one that can be produced in spatial computing, given the sort of scale requirements for a number of the timelines. A thought half finished, but something that I intend to continue on at some point. Talking to the folks at the Metropolitan Museum.
I think it makes eminent sense, and it's a real shame the book stops just for the digital age, which is probably convenient because timelines are just hard to do in software.
Yeah, Yes, well, and timelines are also especially hard to do with low density pixel displays and then low resolution, like low physical dimension displays. But we are almost getting to the point where that is behind us. Something that I have a yet to be scheduled trip to New York coming up, and I want to talk to the folks at Metropolitan Museum of Art because they have a large quantity of incredible Asian scrolls. And those would be really great to have visible and displayed at full size. And the digitization department is very well positioned to be able to make the best possible representation of that.
This kind of stuff as well, of course.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, cool.
And this guy here, of course.
Also
That's
cool.
why Jonathan is not online. He is here. I mean, what you're talking about there really leads into the purported, supposed main theme of today, which is when you are in the space, you have something you bring in, and you also have a context, and then you have your annotations, and time should at least be a layout mechanism. So the difference between okay, so I've been testing with our meetings for the last few meetings and putting it into the system. So it's very, very easy to get all kinds of little index cards. It can be a concept, a person, and some interesting quote. Quite easy to get. The thing is, some of them you probably want to have as context. So every time, I don't want to have to define Mark Anderson every single time. You know, I want to have this is what is important about Mark to me. These are the things, connections to him that I find relevant, etc. To me, that's context. And also, if Tom says something interesting again, that should be different from a defined concept, because chances are it will be a bit longer, right? So how to even choose to present that is a different challenge. So it's not a defined thing. And then finally, we have the normal new concepts. So all of these things go very interestingly, easily into XR. The question is partly how to manipulate them when we're in XR, and also how to deal with the data. And the problem with visionOS now being a very, very early OS, the app cannot open data by itself. It has to have an open dialogue. So to separate content from context, currently for an app, WebXR is of course different with its own issues, is not possible. So it then becomes using the Mac side of things, where you have, this is my context that you can reuse, and then have a method through which you can add that to your new stuff. So that's become an interesting exercise. Now, we were supposed to have more fun stuff to show you today, but unfortunately my programmer has been unwell, so he's done very, very little. But I'm trying to address that, because the key thing, now Jonathan was just, well, he's still in the headset. To see people do the gestures, when you actually see, it's almost like they're doing magic spells. Like, I want that here. This should be there. You know, all these things to work on that. Yeah, so that's just really kind of an opener. Okay, so, another thing that I'm trying to add is time. And as Marcus rightly pointed out, time is difficult. Some things are hard-edged, some things are not. The publication date is one date, but not down to the second, down to the date. When a war ends, maybe over a period of weeks, even if there's an official armistice day. Periods like the Renaissance is even vaguer, of course, to choose to do those things. So we're planning to do some experimenting with, optionally, in any of these little cards, you can choose to have a from and to date, or just a from date. That contrasts a little bit with something you add to a historical event versus our meeting notes. Like today, I'm going to analyze all of this stuff and make them, so then it'll be today's date. Because we have this sorting mechanism, you should be able to select all quotes, select all people, whatever you want, and then secondarily choose a layout. If you choose depth, it should automatically allow you to do it by time. Right, so that means you're free to move that time stuff anywhere you want. You don't have to live within something constrained. Please, Tom, and then I see Mark have some comments.
Yeah, real quick. You could represent it with color, as well, because the more recent things could be a different color and then they fade into other colors as they move more into the distant past. That would be another visual clue. I mean, the problem with putting it depth wise is that it's going to be hard to see, I think, unless you also do color, because then you can sort of visually see patterns of, okay, this is a conversation I had last week. This is a conversation I had 3 weeks ago, last year, blah, blah, blah. And the other thing I was going to say is, from a time perspective, it's entirely subjective. A Douglas Adams quote I put in there: "Time is an illusion, especially lunchtime." Uh, the the context that you need for your time. So, for instance, if I'm talking to somebody who I don't know or I don't know very well, I'm more interested in who they are and what they are, et cetera, et cetera. But if I'm talking to somebody who I talk to all the time, let's say I'm talking to Mark, I already know kind of who Mark is, but my most relevant thing is, what did Mark say most recently about what I care about, right? And in our most recent conversation, so I can catch up quickly and we can launch into the next conversation without spending 20 minutes trying to figure out what the hell we said last time. So that's just a couple thoughts there in terms of measuring time.
Yeah, I don't mind using color when it comes to something like fading, like fax paper used to get more yellow over time. But the question is the granularity, how many colors you can have to indicate different periods of time. Maybe you only want 3 relative to one point in time. Definitely something we can do. Right now, the focus is more on the spatiality of it, whether it's an X, Y, or Z dimension. Because this book that Mark and I have been reading, the MapMen book, the final chapter, not to give it away if you haven't read it, Mark, at the end, is GPS is messing with our brains. People who follow only the GPS coordinates and don't navigate in the world actually have a higher chance of Alzheimer's, believe it or not, because they're not using their, I forgot, Brandel will remember. So to get up and walk into the information, I think, is one of the amazing things that can be offered with this. But yeah, no, fair points. Brandel. So I'm just going to close the window.
Sure. So on this subject of how to encode or indicate things like beginning and end, and the idea of using, people mentioned colors, they mentioned fades. That brings to mind, I'm not sure how much people have done audio-visual editing, but I've picked up this book recently, Timeline 1, A History of Editing. I've not read it yet. I actually bought it because the same author wrote something called Inventing the Future about Apple's advanced technology group
ATG, yes.
From the 80s and 90s. So they both sound relevant, so I thought I'd get them. But in the context of editing, we have to use fades often, or linear fades, or eases, and other neat tricks to be able to have kind of basically distributions of things where you might have a from and a to, but the particular trajectory or distribution of how much that value sort of pertains in one part of that section or other varies. And obviously this would depend on the relevance. Having a time period that eases, like the third kingdom in the ancient Egyptian world has a long ease with a pretty sharp decay in it in terms of the scope of the empire, and you could sort of argue the same for various kind of remnants of the Holy Roman Empire. But yeah, like there are representations, and in the same way that one of my initial provocations was like, what is Photoshop for writing? I think that there are some pretty interesting and entertaining metaphors that we can pursue if we look a little further afield about what other people have had to invent for the necessity of their industries and their inquiries, as we try to stretch the scope of what it is we have the ability to do with text and time and information, particularly in space.
Ditto. Mark.
This is very, as Fred mentioned, so I've just mentioned something I put in the sidebar. I mean, leaving aside the issue that Fred's rightly raised about a sort of essentially OS type constraints about how you get information into the context, which is a valid but separate thing, is that I would say all my experience of working or trying to work with timelines is the one thing you don't want to do is to sort of have a sort of fixed field structure. What you want is a loose coupling. So you can have the notion of a time axis or a time display, but it's very, very likely if you're working with time stuff, you're actually going to have probably more than one set of time data, even if it's tabulated, but you will know that there are several different, say, concurrent axes. And when you're actually trying, when you're trying to do the kind of stuff that I think you might want to do with the time in something like XR, you want to be able to get the right strand of time. And therefore, if you couple it too tightly, so if you have it things like fixed lists of categories and things, that's always going to work against you. So that's one aspect. And I think we've covered the other thing, which is that using sort of hue and saturation can be a nice way. There is a temptation to say, well, I'll make these things blue and these things green and these things, oh, and now I've run out of colors. I think that's a fundamentally wrong way. You're building an infographic there. I don't think what you're doing is exploring a time. So when you're exploring time, like so many sort of information exploration things, you want your hints to be much more subtle than you imagine at outset. That's certainly the 20 odd years of praxis that's what I've learned along the way. So in other words, my first guess was always wrong. I was far too deterministic. And what tends to happen is unintentionally, I just trampled all over the information. The one thing I was trying to desperately sort of, surface was actually pushed down by my over-deterministic approach that I should have X categories. Another thing you might want to think of if you're doing time is binning. So essentially, you don't try and use, say, a linear scale. You have, this era, that era, something else. And frankly, I don't care about the rest, even if they're in the notional scale. Again, this goes back to soft coupling, by which I mean that you don't just hardwire stuff in and then force yourself to go through all the effort of putting the right bit of information in that right field to then show it and find that actually you've captured the wrong thing. And now you've got to go all the way around the box. If you give yourself if you start with a design notion of a soft coupling, you will get far further faster, I would argue. Thanks.
Yeah, there's lots of dimensions there. And hi, Tess, are you in your new place?
Yes, yes, I am. Same as the old place.
This guy's here.
Hi.
That's Jonathan, for those of you who don't see through headsets. Yeah, so regarding a few of those things, when it comes to color, first of all, there are not that many colors we can see difference, but unless they're next to each other. Same with saturation and all of that stuff. Color is useful. Color is important. There's no question about that. I think right now it's really important to look at the spatiality first and foremost, and then as we move through things to add further ways to read things. I think we all agree on that. And specifically, Mark, one thing that you made me think of is different timescales are different things, meaning it's totally appropriate for our meeting record, for instance, to have a timestamp on this Monday. This was said by Peter Wasilko. That's useful and fine. Of course, if you're watching the video review of that, you may want to see the second it was said. Totally fine. But at the same time, if you zoom out, you could say this decade, these people worked on this project. So to having, even in a dialogue, so to speak, on time periods, you may say Renaissance and have it mean something. It doesn't need to finish on a day. So how you choose to do that is important. And as Brandel said, then you can choose the so-called rendering of that. If you're talking about the Renaissance or something like that, just make it smudged on each side, so to speak, because it's still a human who's going to interpret it, right? Yeah, no, the color thing, Tom, is fine to experiment with in 2D, but how many times, I mean, if we talk about these meetings, there's almost 600 of them that are recorded. How do you suggest time would be used to record that? Or are you talking in something more limited?
I'm actually talking about probably something more limited, because one of the things that we really should see the most we can do, because everybody's going to come into this a little bit differently. And so there's going to be no one right way. There may be wrong ways, but there's not going to be one right way. And different people may have a different tolerance for messiness and may want it more, And so having a slider that says, first of all, this is how many colors I want. I want 3, I want 5, I want 10. And then having a slider that says, this is the bracket of time I'm most interested in. I only want to look at information from meetings for the last 2 months, or I want to go back 2 years and I want to look for specific conversation points that have repeated themselves over those 2 years. Those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for if I'm going to work my way backwards in time.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, not fair enough. Fair points. Brandel and Peter.
One of the things that I think was really interesting that you mentioned, or sort of implied, maybe, is the necessary role of vagueness. And something that computing often tends to do is tend toward over-determining things, over-specifying or putting exactness in place of where generality is a better sort of guide. And I think we especially need to have generality in the context of sort of understanding what to do with a broader space, an environment in which we can kind of make sense of things, because the specificity that comes with columns and coordinates and all of those things, obviously at a representational level, they do need to exist. But text is a really amazing beast in that I think it's Stanislas Dehaene talks a lot about how you can't imagine an animal. You can imagine sort of a car because it's a specific as well as a category, but an animal doesn't exist. But we can use the word animal just fine and sort of temporarily. So there's absolutely no visualizing an animal. There's a cat or a specific cat. And so one of the essential components of text is its capacity to carry those generalities in a way that, for example, even infographics may suffer with. That's one of the things that I'm so interested in getting this poetry into virtual reality, getting the scale and things like that, because I think that the vehicle that has that generality is such an interesting one to be able to then transpose into a place where we can do anything and put it anywhere at any size. But yeah, the tendency of any computing thing to at base actually require that specificity is one thing, but the other is that these display capabilities having this incredible capacity for specificity. Yeah, oh my God, I'm on Pandora, whatever, is playing against the strength of text, which is this generality, and making sure that our representations have room for it is something that is simultaneously against the grain of what people think that the medium is for, and against the actual foundational necessities of the technological medium underpinning it. And so I think it's something that needs to be fought for somewhat sort of ardently.
Yeah, absolutely, Brandel. I picked up Walter Ong's Orality and Literature book, and having read parts of it and not reading it properly, it makes your point really, really well. And there's so much more there. How it came up last week that Donald Trump, for instance, is a strongman leader. So his style of communication is orality. Orality can be written down, but it's written kind of as a stream of consciousness. A literate society is where it's written down, edited, looked through, connected, structured. So what we're looking now with the literature or literacy in XR, to one extent, is adding a Z dimension, but to another extent is adding ourselves, because the act of walking into it, I think, is just mind-blowing. We're going to ask Jonathan, what did you think of when you could walk into the stuff rather than have it in the distance?
Well,
since you're the freshest experience.
Well, I have to say, it's I feel resistance to doing it, but I think just because it just takes a little bit of. I mean, I know I'm not going to crash into anything, so once I've got around that, yes, you can walk up against it.
Sorry, he's trying to disappear, guys.
Yeah. Well, it feels. in a way, it feels more natural than pulling things towards you, is just to get straight up to them. And so, if one were using this on quite a big scale, I think you might start to have to focus on how to make it easy for people to physically move around by walking, if that's going to be a genuine way of using it. So what do I mean by that? I mean, it might be that if you walk towards your information, maybe it could automatically come a bit closer to you, in a way sort of accelerating that gesture, if that is a gesture. Because otherwise I'm going to be running around doing quite a lot of steps, just moving around my data. It's just a thought.
Yes, the scale, makes a difference, but it is a very different experience. What I'm trying to say, sorry, Jonathan.
I was just going to say, I'm very conscious that I do have this choice, which obviously you don't have with the normal 2D screen. I can either do that, which works really well, and as Frode has pointed out, this gesture does accelerate as happens on the trackpad. So if I'm moving quicker, then I think it comes to me faster. So I can do that, or I can do this, which is much more kind of visceral, which is actually go straight up to it. But I do have to make that choice, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing that I make that choice.
Thank you. The thing is, so I'm trying to write a paper here for the Chai. I don't understand why they changed the name from HCI to Chai, but whatever, same thing, on some of these things. And we have framed information, so we have all these mechanisms to deal with what's on a little screen, columns, colors, all of these things. And when you're in the knowledge itself, you become the operating mechanism in a sense, because it is your gesture, it's your body, it's where you are. So it's hard to develop. Now, Peter, I see your hand up, but just briefly, there's a few interactions worth mentioning, because that's the fit and polish of this. One is, when you select something, it's look and pinch. That's kind of obvious. To open something is double pinch, and that makes it bigger, more information. Please note that when you do that, it doesn't mean it's selected. So that's quite different from what we're used to. You can have 5 things selected, look at something else, double pinch, it'll open, and still stay unconnected, so you don't ruin what you have already kind of held in your other hand, so to speak. Also, to move something, you look and move. It's also not selected, which is really, really interesting. So you can have, let's say, all the people selected, you move them around, something's in your way, you look at that thing, move it, you still have all the people selected. These are entirely, to me anyway, new interactions. Also, we've added, if you have stuff and it's too much, it's overwhelming, you do this, you pinch in and pull out. That, just like zooming in on a map, that means everything else disappears that isn't selected or connected. So you can still interact with that as much as you want. You do that action again and everything comes back. And finally, the other non-standard interaction is, if you've looked at something, it's getting messy, you look at it and you pinch in, it throws it back to z equals 0. And this is very much from the experiment with Dave Miller the other day. The original plane has some meaning. So stuff behind it or stuff in front of it or itself can still have value even though it's 2D, because you can easily snap to it. I hope we will develop more language like that to help you navigate in the space and navigate and move the things in the space. Peter.
Yeah, I wonder if we should only be thinking of the data objects as being passive, or whether we could have an active mode where the item might recognize that you're moving towards it, and it might come towards you to meet you halfway. Also, there's sort of a bird flocking behavior if the elements were aware that there were other elements near them in certain proximity, so that you could grab one and start moving it, and maybe nearby elements would start following it.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of magnetic behaviors and so on, almost like force-directed 2D diagrams. Yeah. Yeah, I hope we can get to a point where we can start experimenting with it. Ken, if you are here audio-wise, have you done any work on that?
What, did you bring me up to date? I got a call from my wife, so.
Oh, say hi next time you see her.
That's why I muted the, yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Peter was talking about like we have force directed flat 2D diagrams that kind of follow things, about doing that in XR.
You mean stuff that moves on its own? Is that what you're talking about?
Peter, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, I was saying having all the individual elements be aware of what's happening in their proximity, so that if you were approaching something, it might start to approach you to meet you halfway, or it might be aware that you'd move something of a certain type in proximity to it, and it might change its behavior accordingly. So you get like bird flocking behavior kinds of.
Yeah. A lot of what we're trying to do in our lab is trying to say, I'm walking through information and it knows what it's trying to understand. And we're trying to use also AI for this. It's trying to understand what it is I care about. And so it's dynamic. And that means that it not only there are many dimensions of movement. It's not just position and orientation. It's also scale. It's also semantic zooming. It's also selection of text. I may walk towards something and then it splits into a cloud of different choices. I mean, we're looking at all those different things because, as Frode keeps pointing out rightly, the whole game is different when the text is in your physical world than when it's in a little rectangle. So yes, that does intersect with the stuff we're playing around with.
It's interesting to hear you frame it that way, Ken, because even the simple act of opening something we're experimenting with. So you have, let's say, Ken Perlin, a nice little card, and then when you do a double click to open it, it may, because the origin was on a flat plane, it may be partly obscured by something else. So we're now making it so it becomes 3 centimeters deep, meaning it moves forward a little bit. So if it was too close to something, now it's more readable, and you do that and it squashes down again. All these little physical-like things in virtual space that we just don't need to think about, that becomes important. What you're talking about with subclouds is really, really fascinating. What is your experience so far with walking up to something and it becomes a cloud versus pulling it towards you? Is that the same?
Well, I mean, to me, the it's not like I would say a priori that there is one correct answer. I would say that it is the goal is to lower cognitive load, and the answer is whatever works. And this is one of those things where human subjects testing is actually very necessary because we're working in a different kind of space now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very grateful that Jonathan is still in the headset. It is so important to just be in there for a while. It really is a different thing.
Yeah, I mean, to the point of what works, there are some things that change the basis on which you can expect some things to work. On a pixel grid display, there's a high propensity to have a particular layout or arrangement. In the past, it was necessary to resolve that down to the pixel because, anti-aliasing or rotating text was so ugly as to render it sort of much less valuable to have type rotated at 5 degrees, or potentially even impossible depending on the resolution of the display. That's no longer the case. In virtual reality, the pixels are aligned with your eyes; they happen to be, but in terms of the actual display of things, it wouldn't make sense for that to be quantized. And so, having things at a range of distances and having those respond as though they are an actual space is important, and that means that those particular layouts and those particular orientations can't be kind of held as more prime than others. It's something, as I'm sort of looking at things like spatial CSS, that I know is going to annoy a lot of designers. If you have the New York Times and you have some of the type recessed in comparison to others, then it means if you look at it on one side versus the other, then the gutters are wrong. So there's a lot about the modalities of display that are sort of upended as a consequence of really accepting and accommodating spatial display, but it means that things like scale and zoom and proximity and things like that are slightly more up for grabs.
It's really interesting where this is going right now. I was thinking, for some reason, during that of so I have this Ken Perlin, and now it sticks out a little bit, right? And I want to add an annotation to that. I want to say something about Ken that isn't just the text inside. When it's this size, it's almost like a glasses case or something. It feels very much like a container. So it might be fun and useful to be able to put something inside it. Right, not on its openness, but kind of inside it. And one of the things talking about in terms of the new thing versus the context thing, the way it currently works in Author is you can copy defined concepts from one document to another. So it means I have one now that is all of you guys plus our main things that I'm using as kind of the space around. But what I'm understanding from our conversation is that because unfortunately it's one actual document, even though it represents different things, when you paste defined concepts, the receiving document should know that they've been pasted so that they are known to be context. Reason for that is I can imagine when you're working in this space that sometimes you want to hide everything that is context and only see the new stuff. Right? So these hiding and revealing things are becoming really, really fascinating.
Now, I could mention briefly some of the stuff that we've been playing with. I could show you things that I'm about to share with my students tomorrow. I'm teaching my VR class because my next assignment for them is going to be to have them make things with text. That's just where we are in our semester. So let's see, I guess I could share my screen here. Sure, I'll share my screen. This is all just WebXR. Here we go. All right, so that's my screen. That's a little WebXR thing. I've got a bunch of different things for them to play with, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But then we're up to text. And the example that I gave them is I'm just going to go into my little WebXR emulator here. So it's going to pretend it's the headset. And if I go enter XR, oops, I needed to do it in the other order. There we go. If I enter WebXR, then if I get closer to it, you see there's a tiny little postage stamp there. This is the first page of Tale of Two Cities. If I get closer to it, this is all unsigned distance fields as text, so that it fades gracefully as it gets further away, and then it becomes clearer. So as I get closer to this, it's actually the same page. It's the first page of A Tale of Two Cities. And then if I'm wearing my headset, you walk up to it, and when you're like this close, it's clear. So that's just to give them the idea that you could have text that's, the big one is like a 1-inch font, and then the smallest one is like sort of maybe a 4-point font or something. So the idea being there that I want them to be thinking that they could be, big text, little text, text anywhere, and they're free from scale because they're wearing a headset. And then ask them to say, you go ahead and do a design based on that freedom. So that speaks to your annotation idea.
This is wonderful, Ken. By the way, the reason I'm bringing you up as the example today, I showed somebody from the company Scholarcy. Well, he sold it, Phil Gooch. He was in the headset, and he went through the people, like, Ken Perlin? He was one of those people who really knows who you are. So it was quite fun to have you there shining through.
Maybe he plays Minecraft. I don't know. Okay.
Well, one thing he did, actually, it's worth contextually mentioning it here. What he's doing now for fun, Tom, you will like this. He's used Claude.ai to make a game engine entirely in Claude that renders on the web in JavaScript, and it works. So he spent 2 hours on the original, and then he spent 2 weeks to polish. You know how it is, right? He took a story made by a friend, used the game engine, used Claude entirely to make a kind of a multiple choice adventure. And his friend who wrote the story was really surprised. A lot of the context, a lot of the questions wasn't in the story, but it's entirely what he wanted. So that was fun. So I said, okay, so we're sitting here at the V&A. And by the way, when you guys are in London, we're going to the V&A. There's a fantastic members room. Tess, you're next, then Mark, if when you come up. Anyway, so I said, why don't you take Shakespeare? So we took the first bit of Hamlet, told Claude, make a story using this engine. And he said, no, there is no Hamlet in the first section. Are you sure you want me to do that? Shouldn't I start in the second bit? Yeah, okay, fine. Do the second bit. And then we had a chat. 10 minutes later, it was done. Sound effects, okay visual interface, clicking through. So I'm trying to understand with him how we can use it in our field to gamify our documents. And how to do spatially, I have no idea. But this was on a whole different level. And this is not an AI group at all. But I just finally also want to say, writing this letter for Chai, and I decided to run it past Claude and ChatGPT, the whole hallucination thing is gone, right? It doesn't give me any nonsense. It says, because I ask it, what Chai paper has been most cited for XR and text? And it comes back with, oh, there isn't a specific one, but here's a few. And it gives me links so I can look at them. It is like sitting next to a really brilliant Dave Millard who knows the industry and get it. I still have to do the writing, but it's absolutely shocking. Sorry, that was way tangential, but in order to use our XR space, we really need to look at, and I know, Tom, this is your sugar bowl, so to speak, we need to look at how this can actually help power the space rather than fight against it, right? So I was supposed to have more interactions to show you guys because that's what it really comes down to. Just a question. Obviously, Brandel, you have the headset, so you can try it. But Ken, you have access to a Vision Pro as well, right?
Yeah, but I never use it. Apologies to Brendel. I always use this because it's just so easy for me to develop for in WebXR and video pass-through, and I just throw it in my bag and take it everywhere. So quality's not as good, but for hacking purposes, it's just so easy. Although
Yeah.
my students, I have a number of students who are doing projects with the Vision Pro, so I just let them use it.
Yeah, I hope in a few days I'll be able to send you a public build of this so we can experiment, because just like Jonathan here going around and questioning this and questioning that, that's where the rubber hits the road, isn't it?
Mhm. Also, I just purchased 16, not these, but the MetaQuest 3S, so that I could give every one of them to my students. And they cost $300, and I couldn't do that with a more expensive headset. Just have every student just have it for the whole semester. So there's this trade-off.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just in the Alan Kay mode of using the expensive one to live in a few years in the future. I do expect this quality will be normalized soon. And I am really shocked at the power of AR. As I've written in different articles now, the work that we did with Sloan, I'm really happy with it. But the first year, we were in a swivel chair, moving around and using laser pointers. Absolutely fine for one kind of work. What we did in the second year was generally fully VR because of the permissions and all of that. But unless you have a special room, you can't do it. But now with AR, I know it's obvious, but to actually feel it, to put things all over the room and not worry about tripping over things, it's transformational. Mark.
Yeah, just sort of catching up. So in terms of, where we are explaining, say, to friend or relative who is not au fait with this. So what's the headline, aside from cost, what's the headline difference between AVP and the Quest? I mean, one of the things that seems to stand out is obviously the visual render quality is much higher in the AVP, which isn't necessarily a sort of a qualitative axis of difference, but it's something that's immediately noticeable.
It's more than that, and it's a great question. For me as a developer, one of the amazing things is iCloud. because it's end user, no setup. And it means that I can literally do stuff on my laptop, close the lid, put on the headset, it's there. That really makes a huge difference. Fabian spent a lot of time last year looking at all kinds of connection things, and you had to have a separate server, and you had to have this login, you have to ID, you have to all of these things. That's gone. That's automatic. The rendering quality is spectacular, but it's not just the rendering quality of crispness, it's also the volume of what it can deal with. The text in what I have is very not optimized. It is all 3D text. Every single character is 3D, right? Which is quite insane. Even on the first Apple Vision Pro, it rendered okay, stuttered a little bit. Now that it's an M5, it goes on. So it becomes, in terms of the research, like what Ken is doing, I would say, I'm sure you would agree, Ken, it's kind of irrelevant. But in terms of an end user putting it on their head and doing stuff, it's important. So it's two different things.
Yeah, speaking just as a personal person who doesn't know any more privileged information about it, this thing has 7 cameras on it. One, two, no, yeah, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The Vision Pro has something more like 15. There are 4 on eyes, and there are more above and below, so that the tracking range is better. The new one has an M5 Apple Silicon chip, which is just leaps and bounds ahead of this. But to Ken's point, most of the time that doesn't matter. But it does mean that it has the ability to drive a much deeper software stack in terms of what is being mediated and managed by the operating system versus the individual experiences. And again, that's not to toot his horn, it's just to state the fact. So most of the Quest experiences that you have are almost the exclusive domain of the application that happens to be running it, which means that it's taking the orientation information and driving pixels. And that's good, but that's not necessarily the kind of thing that in the long run you want to put your credit card details into, or have managing sort of the space between your digital life. And Vision Pro is more in line, to Froda's point, with the iCloud in that kind of context where it's in that ecosystem. It has the foundation and the basis to be able to do that privacy and keeping certain pieces of information away from applications, which requires the additional headroom, so to speak, of having an operating system that is able to continually run in the background and do all of those things. So in the short run, it may not matter, but in the long run, I think even Quest will want to get somewhere like that in order to be able to have that foundation. But in the meantime, as long as you have all of the handles available to do the experimentations, you can do not exactly the same thing, but much the same thing between those as you're trying to work out what the modalities and the requirements are for a further flung future where all of this processing power doesn't matter. Hopefully that makes sense.
I'd like to add to that a little bit. What excites me about the Apple Vision Pro is it feels very much like the Mac in 1984. It's a beautiful device, way overpriced, incredibly sophisticated for today, but in not that many years, it'll be an arcane thing sitting on the shelf and I'll smile at it. And the reason I say that is Dini wanted, in the beginning of Sloan, to be in a gray space where the knowledge was the thing. And that is an absolutely important avenue to look at XR. And there is also the one where you have knowledge situated. So right now, the knowledge we're working on here is just situated in your physical space. But of course, we all want it to be situated also in a knowledge space. One thing that has been asked by a few people who've tried it is, can I snap one of these things on and put it on the wall, for instance, right? Yes, well, you know, the Mac 50th anniversary is coming up, and I am thinking we should consider doing something in XR, but anyway. Yeah, the thing is, this is the very, very beginning. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but Mark, you are such a provocative, nice question. That once we can be in the room and reconfigure the room, so like as Peter has said it, my real bookshelf can be my virtual bookshelf as well, etc. And when we can have, as Peter also was talking about, active elements in the room, a document in itself is not that much. Mark, you're the king of using big monitors and doing lots of things. And we don't have the manner through which to have that information correctly. But once we do it, I think it'll be amazing.
I just quickly say, thanks. It's actually remarkably useful because I spend less time in the headsets than some of the people here, and just to sort of recalibrate, because I'm constantly under moving, and I'm also conscious of the sort of the different directionality in the sense of one is working within a wider sort of environment, and the work that Ken's doing, as he rightly sort of says, is but I can do the thing I want to do instantly now, and I see how it's also difficult to basically push hard on both of those directions at once, but they're not necessarily going in different directions. Just one thing I thought to pass comment on is that I think it's worth bearing in mind that, going back to the spec about whether people wanted a grey background or something or not, what that was actually talking about was we had effectively arbitrary backgrounds in a constructed environment, which some of the group found to be unhelpful because essentially it was noise into the picture. I would be very cautious to conflate that with the notion of AR, because with the AR you know what's there because you're standing in it. You can take the hands up and have a look. That's slightly different to standing in a completely constructed environment, possibly made by somebody else who has a very different perception of the space they think you're going to be in. And I think that was the discussion that was going on there, which doesn't, I think, is separate to AR. I mean, not that it particularly matters, but I thought it was worth noting that as we pass. Thanks.
I think that's very important, Mark. And since the Super Bowl came up, what could a Super Bowl ad be for working in XR? Let's say we got the billions and we build it over the next few years. What should the Super Bowl ad look like?
Well, just to put it in context, when Ridley Scott did his 1984 Super Bowl ad, which I remember my computer graphic nerdy friends and I gathered around the computer and patiently waited out the football so that we could watch the ads. And we loved the ads. And when that ad came on, it wasn't actually about the Mac. It was about, this idea that the future is finally here and we're going to free you. So I think it would have to be metaphorical if it was going to rise to that level.
I'm trying to find something to show you regarding that. Hang on. I think you're spot on. 1 second. Have you guys? Yeah, you're spot on. I'm going to give you a link. Please have a look on your machines. Tell me if you've seen this ad. I think it's the most wonderful thing. Many people think it's dumb, but they're silly. Are you guys familiar with this one? Oh, yeah. Actually, I will mute while I play it here for John.
Me too, but say more about that, Tess.
Because yes, but it was all lies, or it was all a potential scenario, but it just went sideways more than it went forward. I mean, it's just now looking at it when we're just looking at so much of a race to the bottom and um yes, there was tremendous potential, but it just got eroded. It just got hollowed out. It's yeah, we had all this technology, and what do we do with it? We create, we've ruined our political process. We're firing people because we think AI can do their jobs, and we're reading resumes with AI that thousands of people are applying to because there's no work to be found for such a large portion of people, and it's just, man, it bummed me out. Yeah, sorry.
Well, we're at a stage now where maybe we can correct that, but I just wanted to point out, from what I heard, Michael Chow, who was pushing for the projects of doing the Newton, that speech you heard was actually the speech he gave Scully on a plane to Tokyo to launch the Newton, which was a whole different direction. Tom?
Of course, we should never uh, forget that the Newton killed off General Magic, which was probably a better product. um, the point I've been writing about for years that the problem here is not so much the technology as it is the human mindset. That we need to evolve from what I call Homo industrialis, which is a mindset that's been inculcated into our heads for the last 150 so odd years, to Homo digitalis, which is a mindset that that's exactly what that guy was talking about. We can build the universe that we want, and that we have the tools to do that, as opposed to being forced to accept the universe that exists that others impose upon us, such as the factory or the office, which is just a factory with ties. And that and I continue to think that's possible, and I think most of the things that Tess and others look at in terms of the way the world has gone down the tubes is the fact that people are still thinking in terms of industrial servitude and just using new technology to try to enforce that and to make it worse and basically make a profit off of it. Whereas the real vision there is that you can build a universe that makes sense for you and customize it in such a way. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that all the time. The big holdup up to this point has been coding. Just the technical barrier of, if you want to create a universe for yourself, you have to code the stuff. And but if now with AI, that barrier is coming down. So that's what really excites me there, is because you can create universes of yourself for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I agree with a lot of what you're saying there, Jess, but this community is about reinventing that and changing it, because a lot of the components are now available. I mean, the fact that me, with a tiny, tiny company, can build an AR app and actually have it available is quite crazy. And that's fun and that's nice for me. But if we don't work together to make sure that the standards are shareable, open, and communicated, then it might very well be exactly the same again. But on terms of the language, you talked about an office being a factory with ties or suits, which is quite cute, Tom. I like that. I just learned the other day that bureaucracy, the word, comes from bureau, meaning desk. It's literally running something from a desk. With XR, we can literally, physically, metaphorically, and actually get off our desks and enter into what previously was only framed knowledge. There's something so inherently powerful in that. If we don't screw it up as a community, I think it really can unshackle us. And I'm sure Brendel has something on that.
So I'm going to disagree that programming was the hard part, because while programming is hard, I don't want to dispute that. There's a lot of things that other people can do other than programming. And it was out of reach, for a lot of people. There weren't computers for people to do word processing on, but I've just finished reading Pete Peterson's Almost Perfect. What a monster. But it also, Word Perfect was $500 in 1987. That's a lot of money. And now Google Docs is, to all intents and purposes, completely free to anybody with a smartphone, and almost everybody has a smartphone. I think that the difference is that the smartphone is markedly worse in terms of the affordances of how you feel about being involved with text and what you can consider to being available to do. And even people who have, big, nice desktop setups for whatever reason, they have the wherewithal, or they have, um, are poorly positioned a lot of the time to recognize that they have the space and time, the literal space in terms of the way that their applications work, and the time to be able to sort of set things up and deploy them in service of specific sort of tasks and mindsets and environments to be able to kind of do interesting work and understand what those alternatives are. And I think that the form factors of phones are good at up to a certain level of task, and that they really really suffer. People can and have written novels on a phone, sitting on the plane and things like that, but most people don't. The hit rate for how many people have written, a great novel in WordPerfect is low, but I would argue it's likely lower for text entry on a phone. And then something that neither the sort of the a bigger phone or a better desktop really does battle with is the deliberative space, the time that people have the ability to devote to. And I actually don't know what the solution is there, other than being able to make it so that more attractive ways of spending time are more ready to hand for folks. And I hope that virtual reality has the ability to sort of press on both of those issues at once.
And I said the most interesting things there. Goodness gracious. Um, I was beginning to just a reaction on what Tess wrote in the comments about, if no one has a job and can afford a headset. So in one way that's irrelevant, but another way it's to the point, right? There are some big things that we, even in the wider community, can't stop. AI is one of them. XR, to an extent, I think is just going to happen, right? Our job is to accept these things and to really work to make sure that they are the right kind of interactions that really augment us, that they're not just owned by somebody, whether it's us or someone else. That's why we have this community, right? It is. I'm not doing future of tech stuff purely because of an interest in typography, even though I love fonts, right? And the reason I'm excited about XR initially was being a Doug Engelbart acolyte, or whatever you want to call it. I spent so many years trying to show people other and quote unquote better ways of doing things than just being in Microsoft Word or what it might be. But the imagination wasn't there. Now that we have headsets, we have an opportunity to really employ our imagination. So, Des, back to you.
Yeah, I just want to say I don't know if it needs to be said here or not, but I'm a huge proponent of technology. I don't believe that you can fight the future, and I've been a big vocal person in all the all the ways we can use these things as tools, and all the ways we haven't even begin to tap the ways we can use a lot of these emerging tech, whether it's AI or VR or something else. I really believe in it, but at the same time, I just, I see that video and I just think about, um, and like, look, this isn't tech's fault. This isn't technology's fault. This is human error. All the ways that we have just used this stuff for such um, to our own detriment, for our own downfall. We have not realized the potential. There's only, we have killed our middle class. We have a worldwide economic issue with people being underemployed or unemployed, and if we have affordability crises everywhere. And so I just, um, you know, again, it's the people, not the technology. It's the people, not the business, as someone once said to me. So but I do believe in this stuff. I think this stuff's amazing, but I think we also can't deny we've got massive problems um, of a great scale, and right now we don't have leaders who care to deal with them, and that's dangerous. I don't know. Yeah.
Ken, I'm going to give you the microphone in about 10 seconds. Just we try to not do politics here, but we all agree, whatever side of the spectrum we are, there are major problems in the world. All I'm trying to do is to find the Archimedes points to help us nudge things in a direction. I have a strong belief in human nature that if we are better able to express ourselves, think, and communicate, that will help. That does not in any way negate what you said. Absolutely keep it in mind. But we are building tools for thought and communication here. We're not building things just for the heck of it, so to speak.
No, I'm not negating anything you're saying. I guess I just wanted to say, like, I don't know who I needed to reiterate this for because I've been in this group long enough. I think you all know I love technology. It's just that it's not lost on me the other issues it raises. So anyway, I was just saying that mostly for me. It wasn't about any.
Fair, yeah. I saw you muted yourself. Fair enough, Tess. And Ken, sorry, that was more than 10 seconds.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to expand on what Tess and Tom were saying. I completely agree with them, and I would actually say, which is slightly contradictory to what Frode just said, that as Alan Kay said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And I don't think we should be just mandating, hey, we should have glasses and AI and all that. I think we should be explicitly thinking about economic models. Up until at some point, a few hundred years ago, everything was small businesses, family run, and things were moving along the way they were. And then at some point around the 1800s, they discovered, you gather people together in large groups and put them in factories, and you can actually greatly increase the amount that gets produced. But of course, that also created a lot of pain and hardship and suffering. And now we have modern versions of this where the people making the decisions, because they're the people who, make billions of dollars and buy giant islands, actually think it's a great idea that we increase the total. The Jeff Bezos of the world are not thinking about the economic disparity. They're thinking about this is awesome and everybody's getting all their stuff and the economy is really big and I'm really rich. But I think that, going back to what Tom said, if we can be looking at these tools as a way to have a more distributed way of working, where, small independent businesses where people get to steer their own ships can produce a lot using a different paradigm, which is not going to be something that Jeff Bezos is going to be pushing for, then I think we have a mandate to be thinking about that. I'm not saying I know the answers, but I think those are questions that people like us are going to be interested in answering, and people like that are not going to be interested in answering because it competes with them.
I have thoughts. Astral, I see you. As a little wrinkle on that, one of the great things about peak human is going through some of these histories. Numbers do show that when the Industrial Revolution happened, even though the factories were dirty, people were significantly better off. That's why they left the countryside to go to the city, because they would often be starving in the countryside. But of course, the way things have developed and the way it is now with multi-billionaires, it's absolutely freaking insane, right? So absolutely agree with you on the most important point. But all we can do, because we're not preachers, we're not spiritual holy men or women, we're not politician rulers, we're not strongmen or women, is to help other people think. And by think, what I mean is I am very comfortable with my own ignorance. So I'm not saying that people should learn to think as I do, or have my opinions. It's much more fun to be arguing with you guys like we are right now. But I really do think that if we can literally, physically unleash the human mind to more effectively communicate what is inside us, to share that, we have a little bit of an opportunity for greater understanding between different groups. Like, and we're talking about multi-billionaires. So my father was a businessman, not a multi-billionaire, but he did really well. And for him, making more money was like, as he said, soccer goals. You know, he didn't need the money, but it was like a game. That is a really important perspective that we have to accept exists. Some people are just extremely good at it. Similar to how some academics are only interested in talking about why. So why people in the military are only interested in, death-kill ratios or whatever it might be. There are some extremely different perspectives, some extremely different people. And in most of the communities I've been involved with, particularly on the left hippie side, Doug Engelbart, it's easy to say that the other mindsets are bad, to put it in simple language. And I'm not saying that's at all what you're saying, Ken, but I do feel that the work we're doing here, as in right now, Ken is doing things in the real world. I'm not. Brandel is doing things in the real world. Again, I'm not. But I think we have the potential, and thank you, Tess, for bringing this up, to help raise the issues for other people. Because if we end up unleashing the human mind into XR with cheap headsets in 10 years, phenomenal processing power and connectivity, and we end up with Google Docs and Word, that would be an absolute crime. But if we manage to somehow allow artistic minds, financial minds, whatever it is, to better say, I think this and I connect it like this, like you're casting spells with your gestures, your body, your mind, the thoughts and everything, I really do think that just like an immigrant in the city, so to speak, and I'm an immigrant, sharing a meal with someone, kind of getting to know each other is good. It's a kind of getting to know each other thing. So that's why I believe that the problems you're raising are horrific and real, and people work in different ways. We're just trying to look at everything, including, as Ken said, the economic side of things, hugely important. That's why most of my work is on the metadata, which is what Mark and I discuss a lot. We don't often agree, but thank God we're both passionate about it. Because if someone else owns the data, who cares about the interactions? You won't get any, right? That kind of thing. Sorry, Astral, that was a lot. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about, so I've been reading a lot of David Graeber recently. He did a great book on the history of humans, economic systems, the history of debt. 5,000 Years of Debt is an excellent book. Dawn of Everything. So I've been kind of like, as we're looking at new paradigms, I've been going back and looking at like what caveman politics used to be. One interesting thing that they relate is that like humans used to be very fluid with their social systems. Sometimes changing with the season, going from a patriarchal society to a commons-based one, usually based in what regional abundance was. Now, a very interesting thing happened about 5,000 years ago, and that's when we saw the creation of locking technologies emerge in society, literally locks. And technically, like really, like when technologists build something, they usually build it for themselves first. This creates like a locked zero-sum game, this age of competition that humanity is basically organized around for the last 5,000 years has been, rhizomatically built from this kind of locking technology structure, I believe. So our zero-sum game, I think we mistakenly refer to affordability when we should be talking about accessibility with these technologies. How do we give people the ability to, and also like when technologists build things, it's easy to like recognize a piece of technology as something that can be valuable because it can be sold. But the things that happen within those ecosystems, like that is like the interpersonal work, the care work. I deal with like community engagements and in community leaders in VR all the time, actually. And there's like so much labor and so much work that that is done in that space that if anyone were to pay for it, it would not be no value be created. Because people tend, like, survivor species within an ecosystem tend to navigate around scarcity and settle in niches of abundance. So I guess this is the conversation I've been having generally with people that are making metaverse technologies, is decentering the object and realizing that everything is kind of connected is something that we need to be more cognizant of. I think libraries are great bases for hosting a lot of these technologies because they exist within the commons, which it's actually amazing that commons exist in America, for example. We have like the most profitable society in history, and like still in every small town, libraries have popped up, which are like institutions of the commons.
Paid for by Carnegie.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Like that.
A lot of them, yes.
Especially Carnegie.
Yeah, he paid for thousands, literally. I think 600 outside of the country. Anyone have any comments on Astral before we go to Mark? That was a lot. So let's keep thinking about that. Mark? Mark, did you want to comment?
No, I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction. Not completely different. It's still linked, but it was going back to, it was spurred by a comment that might have been yours earlier about, well, why am I doing this? To show people. And I can't escape the fact that, okay, so for the last 22 odd years, my daily driver in terms of the tool in which I do most of my thinking and working is a very open-ended note-taking tool. And I watched it become over time. It's in a sense a place of last resort. When people start using it, you ask them, why are you using this? And then it normally boils down to, well, I've had it, I'm stopped using X and I'm not touching Y again. And before asking you, how exactly do I use this? I said, well, wait a minute. If your whole point is that nothing you have at the moment works for you, you've got this open-ended thing, and they look at you and they pause, and then they said, yes, but how exactly do you use it? And so one of the challenges here is that I'm not sure actually for all but the most creative people, just putting these things in front of people, it helps us, partly because we're the victims of our experience. So, and this isn't to be judgment because it applies to us all. So, we naturally build the slightly faster horse and cart, or we do it one level removed. We build something that isn't a horse and cart, but we put it in a stable because the metaphors are all there, and why bother to change something that sort of works? So breaking out of that is sort of quite hard. And I think at the moment that we have a slight tendency to assume that technology alone will somehow break through that. And I'm not sure I've seen evidence that that's the case. It doesn't mean that we haven't made lots of increase in the things we can do and the range of things we can do. But I find myself constantly thinking, okay, so well, how do you do that? And I think part of the problem is that very few of us are that polymath and that widely read that we can also sit right across the disciplines. It was interesting, a conclave I was in yesterday, and someone was unsurprisingly brought up. We were talking about collaboration and the sort of the live collaboration. Most things that are collaboration are co-presence, and a bunch of people in the same room arguing about who's in charge and no work getting done. Watching systems, you can go and see it. Actually, you can go and see it in something like I don't know, like a crisis center or a hospital or in the military or something. People with completely disconnected skill sets working very, very closely together. The thing that brings it together is a trust. So people speak across their knowledge boundary with. Rather than demanding what other people do, if you look closely, what's actually happening is they're trying to make sure that the request they make or the instruction they give is understandable to the other person. So if you say I want the car to go to 1,000,000 miles an hour, they'll say, fine, they'll put it in full power, but that's not going to go that fast. It's a deliberately trite example, but and this track back to someone saying, yes, well, people talk about multidisciplinary and these things. The only thing that really works is the transdisciplinary, where people are working across the boundaries. That gives you it gives you the room to say, for instance, if you're an artist, to lean across to the person programming something, say, are you sure that's going to work? Not because I understand how the code works, but I can see that as night follows day, the thing that you're doing is effectively rooted in a wrong model. And our natural reaction when somebody does that to us is to politely ask them to go and help somebody else, because we're so busy digging ourselves out the swamp. The last thing we need is more insightful help. But in reality, fostering the sort of the cross flow between the things. I find it interesting in the sort of hypertext conference area where I've been is the deliberate effort to reunite the sort of creative artistic side of the field with the purely engineering side, because that always, you just see nice little kick every time the two are pushed together. Normally with the engineers looking rather doubtful, but it turns out, and again, lest that sound I'm being sort of unkind to any particular group, that's not really the point. It's keeping ourselves open to where insight can come from, which often is from just outside our particular sort of domain of knowledge. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. Briefly back to you, Astral, then Ken. What should be kept in libraries is a really, really important question. And in my mind, it is really, really important that the data and the data types are made available and open, because the software that runs it should be anything. Anybody should be able to write that. I mean, one thing that horrifies me, for instance, this Chai article that I want to submit, I'm going to need Mark's help to put it into overleaf, because of LaTeX is basically markup, and it's really weird. You have all these different things. That's bad enough, keeping a lot of people out of academia who don't understand that. But even worse, when it's submitted, it'll be flattened into a PDF. All that beautiful data is gone. So when we're talking about libraries, I would love to talk to you further about how can we make sure that libraries get the right data so that almost anything can make sense of this. And then just finally, briefly on what Mark was talking about. In terms of technologies, changing things, it's easy to ignore the technologies we have. And when it comes to military tech, I mean, just look at Ukraine. If they don't have the military tech, they can't fight off the Russians. I know it's, as you said, another trite example, but the point is technologies do things. They really do. It is up to us to package them in a way that hopefully they will do the better thinking thing, and that could go on forever. And we have a few minutes, and Ken, please.
But I thought Astrid was before me.
I think that was up from before, but Astral, do you have something addition?
I'll take just one more quick comment. The takeaway that from the Apple video that you shared, it reminded me of like the task at hand seems to be this new machine that we're building. I've been kind of conceptualizing as the machine that can print anything. If we're hooking things up to fabricators and automators and our imagination, like we're going to have the opportunity to basically craft anything. And like, how do we make that accessible to everyone? And like, of course, like we'll need to like, the information that is needed would also be like, has to be environmentally aware. Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts there. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got something after Ken on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I wanted to emphatically agree with what Mark said. I think it was really important and often overlooked. I mean, I've been to various doctors, and so have we all. And my favorite doctors by far are the ones who get over their medical school education and stop using words like sagittal and all that when they talk to us normal people, and actually translate. They say, well, this is because this thing in the body is like this and this happens and here's the force. It's like, oh, I get it now. And in fact, my father-in-law has a best friend named Andrew who works at a factory at Ford and in Kansas City and never went to college, and he's an absolute genius. He talks like a guy from, the rural South, and he starts explaining to you like why things work and why if you apply this paint or you do this with your car or this kind of thing, if you have a cooking surface or something, and he's a genius. He just explains to you how things work in a way that I, as a person who doesn't have those skills, actually understand and can work with. And people like that who translate across the boundaries are incredibly important. And my positive view of AI is not that AI is going to actually do any real thinking, but that I'm seeing with things like Gemini the promise, as Jaron Lanier was talking about 25 years ago, I clearly remember, the promise that AI is going to be able to help us build interfaces between expertise so that humans will be able to connect with each other without being lost in the I went to school for that and you went to school for that. So I just wanted to point out that I think what Mark said is incredibly important, and we shouldn't just take it for granted that we should stay in our silos. This is hard stuff, and we should be focusing on those translations.
Yeah, that's really important. I'm going to end on, from my side anyway, something maybe controversial. Astral, you were saying made available to everyone. I'm not so sure about that because different, we talk about different people and different mindsets and different efforts. I don't think that it's possible to make tools for this kind of cognitive augmentation that everybody will be interested in. There will be very different groups with very specific different interests. I'm looking at people in my own life whom I love and respect. It's not the same. I mean, to put it in a mundane level, like I can spend an hour talking to you about two different lenses that I use for my camera. I'm that category of nerd. Most of us here are nerds. Well, all of us are nerds of different cloths, so to speak, right? A lot of people, it's just not their thing. They may be interested in business or something else. This is, like Mark says, it's not a judgment. But I think that to try to chase building something for everyone won't work. And we should choose who we want to build for. If you want to try to build for everyone, that's fine. I'm trying to build for someone who quite simply wants to invest a bit of time and effort, a little bit, to better interact with their knowledge. That's kind of the entry requirement. If someone's not interested in that, there's nothing. I mean, my background is advertising. I could never sell to them. So it's just, but then how do we, as a community, deal with people who have very different perspectives on this? That's a very important additional issue, but that's a little bit outside of what I'm trying to do with the tool building. Peter, you get the second final word, I think.
Okay, people really have to be willing to invest some time to learn to use their tools. And I think that's something we lost. The old Apple in its glory days cared about building useful open-ended tools that people could explore and take in different directions. Then they got into there's an app for that mentality where you expect a tool specialized for every single task, and you've got to go out and find and buy another tool for every task instead of giving you a useful tool belt and broad capabilities, like having a shop in your basement like my late father had with every imaginable tool. And lots of times he'd use the more general tools, use them in clever combinations, achieve his result without having to go out and buy, here's the special dedicated widget router for this particular subtask that will do that thing and only that thing. And we got into this mentality, we're just locked into these little narrow niche devices and everybody's hyper specializing in things. We need to recapture the value of generality.
Thank you, Peter. And I do have something on that, but brilliantly, Ken has a blog post on that. Please click on the link. I have already done, and I will read that. Now, I mentioned the V&A early on. I'm sure most of you have heard of it. It stands for the Victoria and Albert Museum. I thought it was based on their artifacts. It is not. It was originally coming out of the 1851 Great Exhibition, which happened in London, partly because there have been revolutions and kind of stuff in Europe, and we wanted to make people happy here. And also, the Industrial Revolution produced a lot of crap, basically. So the powers that be thought that we must make people happy and we must increase their tastes. The name V&A came many, many years later, and it was to honor the Queen Victoria.
It's 1 o'clock.
But what was really interesting, and I think so relevant, is that it was built for the working man at the time, unfortunately. It wasn't built for the hoi polloi. It was built for the hoi polloi. It wasn't built for the aristocracy. And it was supposed to be a place where you could go and learn the mechanical arts, learn about quality. There was one of the first places to have gas lighting so that people who had J jobs, not aristocracy, could actually go there and attend lectures. And they have the country's arts library, which is amazing. I look forward to taking you guys there. I think we need something like the V&A for the 21st century. I think we need to work up something where people can, Mark, you're so right with your comment there. Okay, on Mark's comment, they actually have a scale model, one-to-one scale model of, my head, of Trajan's column, right? In just one of the rooms. It is absolutely insane. They had 2.9 million objects, some of them the size of houses. But the point is, it was made to help people be interested in tools, be interested in this stuff. So
it's VR, really. It's Victorian VR. They took a cast of it.
Yes.
And transports you to Rome.
Finally, he speaks. And when he speaks with great wisdom. It really, it feels like being that. Yeah, I've been there with two people last week walking around. It does feel like VR because it's so random. This is not a science museum. That was an offshoot of it later. It's an inspirational place. Imagine if we can make a virtual society where what we really do is inspire people to, we need more gaslighting and less gaslighting. Ken, you're absolutely right. So, I think, Tess, you brought up something horrible based on a beautiful commercial, and you brought up reality. Astral, you pointed out the wider issue. We should absolutely not ignore that. So when it comes to the data, the tools, and the attitude, as I've said before, I am probably obscenely level grateful for you guys. So let's keep building positive stuff while highlighting that it's not all super simple. Have a great week, and I look forward to Monday week. And nobody wake Tom. I think he needs a full rest. Bye, guys.